Hello and welcome to another episode of the Finrestra podcast. I am Jan Muschot. This is a slightly different episode than you're used to because I am doing this completely unscripted. And the reason is that I want to talk about yesterday's news that French bank BNP Paribas is selling its American subsidiary Bank of the West to Canadian BMO. So first some context. Bank of the West has been owned by BNP Paribas since 1979, if I'm not mistaken. And as the name suggests, Bank of the West, it's an American bank that's mostly active at the West Coast, so mainly in California, and it is a retail bank. And there had been rumors last month already that BNP Paribas would be selling the bank. And then I did some digging and I found that even last year, some analysts at Berenberg were suggesting to management of BNP Paribas that they should sell their American subsidiary to have cash that they can use for M&A deals in Europe. Now, for those of you who have seen our YouTube channel, you probably know that we have a video on banks where we do bank profiles in 2 minutes. And one of the first was about BNP Paribas. And then you will have noticed that BNP Paribas, although it's a global bank, 2/3 of its business is generated in France and the neighboring Western European countries. So in countries like Belgium or Switzerland or the UK. And then considering that a bank at the west coast of the United States doesn't really fit into the operations of BNP Paribas. So from an operational point of view and strategically, it does make sense to sell Bank of the West. And especially since it seems that they got a very nice price for it, so they got above book value, and the deal is worth a little more than $16 billion, so that's about 14 billion euro, which gives a nice cash boost to BNP Paribas, and yeah, this will enable it to spend money on acquisitions, probably in Europe. Or in theory, of course, they could also just distribute the cash to their shareholders. But I think that wouldn't be the best use of the cash. Like, if we think about some parallels, last year, Spanish BBVA also sold its US activities. They sold it to American bank PNC. And then recently, BBVA announced that they want to acquire full control over their Turkish subsidiary, Guarantee BBVA. And it seems likely that a similar scenario will unfold with BNP Paribas. So in the rest of the episode, I would like to speculate, like, what can BNP Paribas do with its 14 billion euros of cash? Suppose that they really do use it for mergers and acquisitions in its core markets. So again, BNP Paribas is mainly active in Western Europe and especially in France, Italy, and Belgium. Now, the problem with Belgium is that it is the owner of BNP Paribas Fortis, and that is already the largest bank in Belgium. So it seems unlikely that they would get approval to acquire yet another bank in Belgium and to merge it, because then probably they will get problems with competition authorities and they will be too dominant a player. So the obvious other markets are France, its home market, and also Italy, where it owns BNL, which is, I think, the sixth largest bank in Italy. So first, look at the possibility in France. So which bank could it possibly acquire? And then, of course, the obvious candidate would be SocGen, so Societe Generale. Because the other big French banks like BPCE and Credit Agricole, they are like cooperative banks. So it seems unlikely because they are not listed on the stock market. Well, Credit Agricole is has a quite complicated shareholder structure. But anyhow, I think SocGen would be the obvious solution, or the obvious possible takeover candidate. If we look at the market cap of SocGen, I think, I should have checked before I started recording, but I think it has a market cap of about 25 billion euro. So suppose that they would pay a 20% premium, that would be 30 billion euro. The 14 billion from the sale of Bank of the West isn't gonna be enough. But of course, BNP Paribas could issue new shares, or maybe so do a capital raise, or pay some of the shares of SocGen in cash and some in its own shares. Another possibility, of course, would be that they buy SocGen, but not entirely. They should spin off some activities. And just looking geographically, because I think in terms of business, both BNP Paribas and SocGen can be classified as universal banks. So they both have a large retail business, and then they also have a significant corporate and investment banking division. So just geographically looking at divisions that SocGen could sell, or that BNP Paribas could sell when it acquires SocGen, I think the obvious candidate is Rosbank in Russia, because there, it's still a quite marginal player. I think they have probably less than 10% market share. And my rule of thumb is looking at successful banks in Europe, how they usually, or the one of the main characteristics of successful banks, and it's true if you look, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, you should be like a top 3 player in a certain national market, and you should at least have like 15% market share. Like, these are some typical characteristics of successful banks. So there's no clear path forward for Rosbank in Russia to acquire that market share. So they would be better off selling that, while SocGen is a top 3 player both in the Czech Republic and Romania, and especially in the Czech Republic. This is a large driver of its profits. So there I would advise BNP Paribas to definitely not sell its Czech subsidiary, and probably also not the Romanian ones. And then it would mean that BNP Paribas, by acquiring SocGen, would significantly boost its presence in France in the retail market. It would also strengthen its position in security services and in corporate and investment banking, and I think there would be a lot of synergies in Paris, where they can streamline their operations, and also in other financial centers, so in London or in Luxembourg or in Frankfurt, Singapore or New York. There would definitely be some overlap between the operations of BNP Paribas and SocGen. And so definitely that would be a very value-adding operation for the shareholders, and also just operationally for the bank. And then finally also the European supervisor would finally have a bank that can compete with the likes of JP Morgan. So because combining BNP Paribas with SocGen, I think would create a bank that by balance sheet would be about 3 trillion euros or even a bit more. So that's finally a European bank that would be a significant player also globally, even though it has left it has left retail banking in the US, but the total number of countries doesn't really matter. What you really need to have is be a profitable bank. So definitely by acquiring SocGen, it would be a very good step for BNP Paribas. Now, the other possibility would be to expand in the south, and I mean the south relative to France, and that would be in Italy, which is already like the third or the fourth or maybe even the second. Like, I think in terms of revenue, I should watch my own video again, but I think like now about 10% of BNP Paribas revenue comes from Italy with BNL. And of course, by acquiring the second largest Italian bank, UniCredit, it would be like a quantum step forward, and it would have like a market share in Italy alone of, I guess, between 15 and 20%, which would be in line what I told you earlier. It would be the top two bank after Intesa Sanpaolo, and it would have a nice market share. And of course, like, actually it's very similar to SocGen. So the market cap of UniCredit is about 25 billion euros. So again, paying like 20% premium. Then again, you would get the problem that with 14 billion from the sale of Bank of the West, you would only have about half which you need. But I think for UniCredit, it would be even easier for BNP Paribas to sell off part of its foreign activities. And there, I think the obvious candidate would be to sell its German retail banking activities. So UniCredit is already, I think, the top 3 or 4 player by total assets in Germany. But still, that's only a couple of percent of the market, because the German retail market is very fragmented. So it would make sense to sell the Munich-based UniCredit Germany. And what BNP Paribas definitely should keep when it buys, or like, suppose, because of course I should remind you that this is all speculation from my part, but what they should keep is UniCredit's activities in Austria, because there it's definitely a top 3 bank, and also the Eastern European activities of UniCredit. So it's the 4th largest bank in the Czech Republic. Maybe they can keep it, maybe they can sell it for a good price, because the Czech banking market is very profitable. And I think UniCredit also has like a market share like in the Balkans. Now, of course, these are very small economies, so yeah, there's no pressure for to sell these, but I think they could get a good price. Like, for example, if they were to sell their activities in Bulgaria or Croatia. But I think there's no rush. They can follow a similar strategy to Bank of the West, like keep it, and then if there are opportunities for growth organically or by acquiring other players, or even just to sell them. But that's not really the core business. Like the core value of UniCredit would be the Italian activities, which they would need to integrate, and also the Austrian activities. Now, what would be some of the challenges? I saw some people on Twitter also suggesting like, or asking me like, yeah, what other banks could they take over in Italy? Because if you have listened to the podcast, you probably know that Monte dei Paschi is still for sale, and you could probably buy it for like one symbolic euro, or maybe the Italian government will give you even cash just to take it off their hands. Now, I think Monte dei Paschi has such a troubled history or troubles with the balance sheet, and also its market share isn't that high. Other possibilities would be BPM Bank or BPER Bank. Looking at their stock market prices, they are only worth like they only have a market cap of 3 billion euros. So the 14 billion from Bank of the West would definitely cover the acquisitions of these Italian banks. However, the problem is that then you still would have only a market share combined with BNL of less than 10%. So in theory, it's possible. It would be easier to integrate, I guess. However, if you're really going to execute the best possible strategy, in my mind, which is to be a top 3 player. Yeah, sorry, I got interrupted here. So I think I was talking about the possibility that BNP Paribas would acquire some smaller Italian bank, but that probably wouldn't really be too smart a move, because then they would still be like only they still wouldn't get the necessary market share in the Italian market. So yeah, I think I was saying that definitely if they do a big acquisition, they should go for UniCredit instead of some smaller banks. Maybe there are some possibilities elsewhere in Europe, but I think if we are really looking at intensifying BNP Paribas activity, so it could theoretically expand into the Netherlands by acquiring ABN AMRO, for example. But now BNP Paribas only has some niche activities in the Netherlands, so that wouldn't make too much sense right now. So just to sum it up, BNP Paribas sold its Bank of the West, and now it has a pile of cash, and we'll see in 2020 what it does with it. But here are definitely some suggestions what they can do. If you have any other theories or other ideas what BNP Paribas should do with the money, or just thoughts in general about the M&A landscape in Europe and in the rest of the world, please let me know. You can mail me at jan.muschot@finrestra.com, or find me on Twitter at Jan Muschot. That's at JANMUSSCHOOT. So this has been another episode of the Finrestra podcast. Thanks for listening, and till next time.